Okay, and the last thing that I will explain. Just an overview of the process of fiscal impact assessment. Okay, remember, we are not covering all the derivatives of this assessment. We are not covering different manners to control the PPP liabilities. We are not going to discuss about budgeting or accounting, okay? And this is the last thing that I will describe today. It's just to have an overview of the process for assessing affordability and fiscal impact. So basically, we are talking about fiscal impact per project, for a particular project. In terms of affordability, I mean, implies judgment. It is really affordable for me, this project. And in terms of explicit control, which applies in the case that I have some limits, overall limits or ceilings in the amount of commitments for the PPP program. So the first thing is identify the PPP net liabilities and make some kind of characterization. So I understand how each of these items will evolve or react. So we have to identify and describe, characterize the direct liabilities, the contingent liabilities, and the potential assets. Then we will calculate the values of those liabilities. We will have to quantify some of them, like contingent liabilities. The quantification of direct liabilities from a fiscal assessment point of view is automatic in the sense that when we are going to assess fiscal impact, is once the project is already defined in financial terms. So we have a financial description of the project, which is the base business case. We have the financial projections of the project. And we need to be sure that what we have in front of us, all these projections, represent a commercially feasible project. First questions? Okay. Okay, so sorry for the interruption. What I was saying. Sorry, I lost my. So I was saying. Calculate and quantify the project cash flow. Yes, that the direct liabilities, I would say that is automatic, the calculation, because it's coming from the commercial feasibility analysis. When we have already the description of the financial projections, the financial description of the project, that we need to be sure that it's commercially feasible, so we can test the financial description of the project in terms of value for money and in terms of fiscal impact or affordability. Okay, so I have already the projections of the direct liabilities. Okay, so I have already calculated that, but contingent liabilities require specific calculations that I need to do, and then I will project all the flows. So I calculate and I project all over the contract term. So here there are a number of questions that we have addressed a little bit before, no? Should we consider all the direct liabilities or only the liabilities described in the contract and related to the PPP as a financial mechanism? Should we consider all the retained risks or only some retained risk, excluding some others that could create perverse incentives? Should we consider any fiscal revenue or only certain types of revenue? And so on. And how should we quantify risks? That's a big deal that I don't. Today we don't have time to cover that. But if there is some questions in the questions and answer part of the session, we can discuss about that. Then we have all the projections. Okay, liabilities and fiscal revenues. Then I need to calculate the stock value, the net present value of all those projections. Which rate of discount should we use? Okay, in many countries, they are using the same rate of discount that they use for value for money assessment or for economic social assessment, socioeconomic assessment, which in many cases is the risk-free rate, okay, or other specific social rate of discount. It could make sense to use that for consistency purposes, but I don't think is the most adequate. I think that what we should use is the weighted average cost of capital of the very specific project to discount the future cash flow. We can discuss later on about that. Then I should incorporate uncertainty. As in any assessment, I should incorporate sensitivities and scenarios. Sensitivities to the different scenarios of evolution of the GDP or different scenarios of evolution of the inflation. The higher the inflation, the higher the value of the direct liabilities. The lower the inflation, the lower the value of the direct liabilities. Or different project scenarios. For example, scenarios of very pessimistic traffic. That could even imply that a scenario that I need to rescue the project. That can be early terminated, so I am exposed to this residual risk. Or different values, sensitivities to different values or scenarios of value of the risks, the contingent liabilities. For example, using a percentile 95 or a percentile 100%, the face value of the risk. Okay, so I can take a more informed decision looking to what extent could there be a variation in the fiscal impact in different scenarios or with different sensitivities, different variations of the value of the main drivers. And finally, I will have to evaluate, qualitatively evaluate the impact and to control in the explicit sense, the official sense, when we have a ceiling to the PPP liabilities. And then I will check that if I am incorporating the amount of liabilities, the stock of liabilities of this project into the aggregated exposure, into the aggregated amount of all the liabilities of the PPP program, if I am still under the limits established in the ceiling, okay? That would be the control that I am talking about. I need to evaluate at an aggregated level. It's not only controlling. Maybe we are within the boundaries of the limits, but I can conclude, applying judgment, that it's too risky from a fiscal point of view to proceed with the project. Okay, and I need to also evaluate in terms of sector. It is too big, the aggregated exposure of the sector. Is this particular sector or procuring authority too much leverage on the PPP tool? So there is a problem of flexibility in the long term. And also in the evaluation, I need to think about the fiscal space and the prioritization. I mean, if I do this project, maybe I cannot do these other two projects. Should I prioritize these other two projects and postpone this one or not? Okay, that is project by project, but we need to integrate that in the upstream governance, and we need to monitor each specific project into the reporting system. Okay, so we need to update the fiscal impact assessment every year for each particular project. That will be aggregated into the register, into the overall assessment or the assessment of the overall exposure, monitoring the fiscal space for the process of planning or prioritizing different projects. And also we need to report for transparency purposes. Okay, basically that is it. Okay, I have just a numerical example there, but I will leave it for the questions because it's a little bit late and we have only half an hour more. So let me see the questions. We can start with the questions. So far I have 6 questions here. So the first one is coming from Carlos. Could you elaborate about how to quantify contingent liabilities? Why could not be adequate to use, or could be adequate to use high percentiles such as P95? Okay, Yes, I was mentioning now. When we were talking about sensitivities, that could make sense to incorporate in the assessment certain risk scenarios or certain values, like for example certain percentiles, like P95, because in fact I do believe that in the initial assessment or in the base case fiscal impact, the base case for fiscal impact, the base projections for the assessment, when we are valuing risks, when we are quantifying risks, the value that I should consider, I really believe that it should be the most likely value. Okay, the most likely value, which is the median. If we are assuming that there is a Gaussian risk distribution, a normal function, the median would be the same that the mean. That should be the value that I should take, because if I take and that is the P50, that means that I have 50% of chances that the value that I am assuming is not bigger or lower than the final possible real value if the project eventuates, because it's the most likely value that will be represented by 50% of the circumstances, or would be covered or represent 50% of the possible consequences. If I don't use the most likely value, P50, but for example, I use P75 or P95, what I am doing is overestimating the value of risk. Okay? And why should I overestimate the value of risk? If I am controlling the fiscal impact against an overall limit, a ceiling, for example, 2% of the GDP, and I am using very conservative assumptions when I am quantifying risks, what I will be doing is renouncing to do projects that otherwise I could be doing if I am confident in the sense and rationale of conventional statistics. I don't see any other value of risk that could make more sense than what is considered the most likely, because we are thinking that in overall terms, the law of the big numbers will compensate one thing with the other. Okay. Julia Moreta is asking, in a control system with ad hoc PPP limits, why not to consider the service of a debt subscribed to finance public payments? Or why not to consider public co-financing? So I guess public co-financing would be the portion of the project that the government will be financing directly, making payments during construction. I think I already explained this, Julia, but just to refresh this, to me, the point when we are controlling the fiscal sustainability of the PPP is as a financial mechanism. So I should not mix this with conventional financing. I'm only interested in the private finance portion of the PPP, because we assume that conventional contracts, which are publicly financed against the budget, so many times will be financed against a public loan to be subscribed with, for example, a multilateral development agency. The financing of those projects, that infrastructure, is already under the radar of the conventional public debt monitoring, or the monitoring of the maximum deficit per year. So if there is a 40% of the capex that is going to be publicly financed by means of public payments, I am already controlling the consequences of those commitments against the conventional KPIs, against the public debt KPI and against the deficit KPI, you see? So if I am also incorporating the liabilities of the co-financing portion of the PPP into the PPP liability control, I am counting twice those liabilities. Does it make sense? Okay, and regarding a payment that could be found against a public debt, I'm just interested in my commitments coming from the PPP contract. How I am managing my finances, my treasury, if I need or not to have behind me a multilateral development bank providing me money, that's another thing. That's another thing, that's another game, that's another control, okay? Again, Julia is asking, what can we do if a project doesn't meet the aggregated exposure ceiling? A very nice question. If I am here and I am controlling the project, if I incorporate the fiscal impact of the project into the aggregated exposure, and I am exceeding the threshold, for example, I am exceeding the 2% of the GDP, I cannot do the project. What can I do? Well, first of all, I can, of course, I will have to reject the project as it is today, but I can reconsider the project in terms of scope. Maybe I can make the project more affordable by means of being more modest in the technical description. Maybe I am trying to do today, a beautiful metro system with 3 lines. Maybe what I need to do is just to concentrate in the first line and leave for the future the other 2 lines. Oh, wonderful. Now the fiscal space that I have is sufficient to accommodate a new project which is only 1 line rather than 3 lines. So I am restructuring technically the project. Or maybe I can restructure financially the project under another different financial structure, or I can revisit the risk allocation and make the project affordable. It could be possible. But the most common is to reschedule the project. No, I should see in the projections of the fiscal space, and maybe in 2-year time, there is a space and I can accommodate the procurement of the project in 2 years' time, because according to the projections of the GDP and the projections of the portfolio, there will be sufficient space in 2 years, and so on. Okay, so I can reschedule, or I can revisit the scope of the project, or I can restructure the project, or I can abandon the project. Rita Kiln, how it is that more risk transfer doesn't mean necessarily higher affordability? Well, if I am transferring risks, I am diminishing, the fiscal impact, the fiscal liabilities, if you wish, is contingent liabilities plus direct liabilities. Okay? So if I am transferring risk, I am decreasing the contingent liabilities because I am getting rid of one risk and transferring it to the private party. So I don't need to consider the value of that risk anymore, but the private guy is going to ask for more payment in exchange of that risk transfer, which is the risk premium. Okay? So when I am transferring risk, I am in fact transferring contingency liability value into the direct liability value. This, generally speaking, for the majority of the risk is going to provide value for money, because in the majority of the cases, the value of the risk for me, probability multiplied by potential impact, according to my experience and my ability to manage risk, is going to be lower. For example, the value for me of a risk is 2, but if I transfer that risk, the increase in the direct liabilities is only 1. So value for money is 1. That means that we have saved $1 in terms of fiscal space. Okay, but it's not always the case. We could be potentially transferring a risk that to me is 2, and they are going to ask for 3. So we are destroying value for money by $1. So in fact, in that case, we will be increasing the fiscal overall liabilities of the project. Okay, it's value for money assessment who should be the driver to decide between the trade-off between contingent liability and direct liabilities. But the trade-off between contingent liability and direct liability is basically risk allocation. Okay. Renata is asking, in a PPP road structure where toll revenues are retained by the procuring authority, how would you quantify the traffic and revenue risk which have been retained? Okay, if we are in a PPP where, like they do in Paraguay, like we did when we were advising the Florida Department of Transportation, this I-595 project, and it was the first government-based PPP in the United States, and it was like I call the divorce between the toll revenue and the payments. Is that I decide, even if there is a toll, I decide that the structure of the PPP is going to be as if it were no toll. So let's see that it's a toll-free road. I will pay, the most efficient is pay on the basis of availability of the road. So I have design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. And for all these costs for design, build, finance, operate, and maintain, I need to pay every year 30 million of availability payment. And then there is a toll. But the toll is for me. I retain the traffic risk. I retain the risk of volatility of that future revenue coming from the toll. And I will use those revenues to fund my payment obligations. If the revenues coming from the toll are not sufficient, I will have to go to the budget and get more money. Okay? All right. So yes, I am assuming traffic and revenue risk. Right? But that is not a contingent liability. That is not a contingent liability. Because traffic revenue is a revenue stream for me, it's an asset. How it is manifested, how it is expressed, the traffic risk, in the variability of my revenues. So in the end, I don't need to consider any contingent liability, but I will incorporate the traffic risk by means of assessing the scenarios of the revenue projection. I should take from the very beginning a net present value of all these revenues as considering the most likeliest traffic scenario. And I will see if it's covering me or not availability payment. If it's not covering me the availability payment commitments, I will need to go to the budget. That's okay. And when the road is open, I will see which is the actual revenue, and I will update the projections, and I will update the assessment of the projections of the fiscal impact of the project. Okay, so the risk, the volatility, is not to be incorporated in an explicit contingent liability in the calculations. It's just correct reflecting, or is to be reflected in the estimates that I will have to incorporate in the fiscal revenues that will net the fiscal liabilities, the availability payment. Cassandra is asking, and this is the last one that I have here in my list. So if there is more questions, Sophia, you can bring me those questions, okay? Cassandra is asking, can you explain why it can be advisable to use the weighted average cost of capital as the rate of discount? Yes, because when we are assessing the fiscal impact of a PPP by means of calculating the net present value of the net liabilities, And then, well, I need to discount the projection of all the payments that I need to do and the projection of the value of the contingent liabilities. Okay, now let's think about the projection of the direct liabilities. The value of the projection, the projected values every year of the availability payments, the direct liabilities, are incorporating, those values are already incorporating the value of risk, the value of the risk that has been transferred. Okay, because when I am paying, when I am committing a payment, okay, when I am committing a contract, the availability payment, part of the payment is reflecting the equity internal rate of return and the margin, the risk margin over the risk-free rate that is embedded into the equity rate of return requested by the bidder. So it's reflecting the risk premium on the equity and it's reflecting the risk premium on the interest of the debt in the project finance. So I'm paying already for a portion of the risk that is transferred, okay? And if I discount those payments, at a risk-free rate, okay, I am counting twice the value of that risk, all right? Because if it is only going to be the true reflection of the availability payments without the risk that has been transferred, the only manner to reflect that value in net present terms is applying a rate of discount that is discounting the value of the risk that has been transferred. Okay? In fact, if I discount to the WACC, what is the net present value of all the availability payments? Is the amount to be financed by the private party. So that value is the amount, basically, okay, is the amount that the private party would ask me if I early terminate the project, because it's the amount that is representing the outstanding debt that they have to pay to the banks and the outstanding equity that they have to pay back to the investors. Okay, you see? So I need to discount the effect or the value of the risk transfer when I am bringing to net present value those payments, because I need to subtract the value of the risk that I have transferred. Another different thing is when I am discounting the contingent liabilities, because the contingent liabilities duly projected, those values for the contingent liability, for the risk that I have retained, they are not risk-free. They are risk that in fact is retained. And I have assumed that risk and I will have to fund or finance those impacts. So when I am bringing to net present values the value of the contingent liabilities, I should use the risk-free rate. In this case, yes, the risk-free rate. But for the direct liabilities, it should be the implicit financial rate of the SPV, so the weighted average cost of capital. Okay, more questions. Richard Jacobs is asking, Andres, how do you or can you quantify securitization of assets as a percentage of overall risk in a PPP project? In other words, pledged collateral like land is utilized as equity towards the PPP project. Is it possible? Is this possible? Richard, not very sure if I understand the question. How can you quantify securitization of assets as a percentage of an overall risk of a PPP project? I'm not very sure if I'm understanding. I mean, when you are quantifying risk, you should quantify the contingencies. That means potential payments that you will have to do that correlates to the risk events that you have assumed. So I'm not very sure about what is the relationship of this with any securitization process. The securitization process could be a way of financing or a financial structure for the SPV, getting a certain future revenue that is really stable and predictable, or typically is unconditional. For example, fixed payments that are unconditional or irrevocable from the public sector. And then you get that, and you issue a bond, and you in fact what you are doing is removing from your balance sheet all the debt together with all that asset. But from a public perspective, instead of making payments to the SPV in the securitization, I have to make payments to the new holder of the bond. But I mean, nothing is changing. So let me see. I see you were commenting. If the project is failure, okay. If a project fails, and I guess that you mean it has to be early terminated, then I need to look to the contract and see which are my obligations in terms of compensations for early termination. And again, if there is there are some PPP contracts where the government is accepting to assume a commitment to pay any outstanding debt, for example. So when it could be bondholders, or it could be a loan, but it's not always the case. But let's say that the worst scenario in terms of the securitization, or in terms of any debt, it would be that my commitment, contractually speaking, is that if the project goes bankruptcy, I need to pay the full amount of the outstanding debt. Okay? So in the fiscal management, the big point is I don't need, or I should not take care about the risk of early termination at the very beginning or at any point of time, unless the probability of the project being early terminated becomes really apparent. And in that case, I should incorporate in the contingent liabilities valuation the contingent value, or the value of this contingency, which is early termination. And that would be whatever the probability of the bankruptcy or early termination times the money that I should pay according to the contract. Let's say that is 100% of the outstanding debt. Then that would be, if I say that it is a 90% of early termination, my contingent liability with respect to this residual risk, because it's a residual risk, is 90% of the outstanding debt projected for the next year, which let's say is 100 million, so it would be 90 million. And then if the probability increases, the amount will increase. If the probability decreases, the amount will decrease. And when I have to make the payment, that is certain, that is a direct liability. That's it. I don't know if I did respond to your question. Okay, thank you, Richard. Any other question? No more questions?
No, Andrés.
Okay, so that's it. Please, as usual, if you are not familiar with these webinars for Masterclass, Sophia will circulate later on a survey about the Masterclass and your interest in the topic. Please, it would be very helpful for us if you respond. And also, please, well, I forgot that I had an example. Let me show just a second. Well, the example it was about the control. Sorry for this. Here you have a new project. Okay, just a second. Here you have a new project that we are assessing, and then you have these calculations is the projections of the direct liabilities for year. Let's say that this analysis was done the last year. So for the year 22, then 23, 24, 25, and so on. Okay, direct liabilities and contingent liabilities duly projected. The two things together is the flow. The sum of direct liabilities and contingent liabilities duly projected every year. And the stock of direct liabilities and contingent liabilities is the net present value of all these projected values. Okay, this stock of this project will be incorporated in the aggregated exposure, the total stock. When I incorporate this project, the total value of all liabilities, all future liabilities in net present value of the full PPP portfolio, which is project 1, project 2, and this new project, goes up to 103 billion. Okay, 103 billion is the new aggregated exposure if I incorporate this project. And then I check which is the aggregated exposure in terms of in aggregated terms against the GDP. Okay, it's 1.82. Okay, let's say that in my country the limit is 2% of the GDP, so I still have a remaining space of 18 points, okay, basis points. All right, and that's it. I mean, otherwise, if this would be more than 2%, the remaining space would be negative, and I would not have a space. I should investigate if I can move forward the timing of the project and reschedule the procurement for future years. All right. And this is the net present value. Typically, what we should do is to project the percentage occupied by the aggregated exposure for a number of years, carrying forward the calculation, because we could have in the program some projects that they enter into load later on. It could happen that I am meeting the space this year, but I know that I will not meet the space this year, for example. So I need to project a number of years. And also, in order to assess which is the overall space that I have. Let's say, for example, that after incorporating this project, I am analyzing another project, and this other project would be entering into load in 2024, and you see that here the space is negative. Okay, the space is negative. I will need to move forward that project. This is a typical graph for fiscal space. You have here in blue, sorry, it's in Spanish, exposición agregada, aggregated exposure. So it's the summatory every year of the value of liabilities. This is so is the space that is occupied by PPP liabilities, and the gray area is the space that is free, is available space. All right, and this is in terms of percentage, how it is the aggregated exposure over PIB over GDP. PIB is in Spanish, decreasing. Okay, and the free space is increasing. All the thing here to optimize space is make this scissors open. Okay, you see here I am putting more load. I am putting more load than here. I am occupying more space, so I am making these scissors being wider. Okay. Okay, I would like to spend more time to explain this, but unfortunately we don't have. But the idea is to plan in medium long-term horizon and be able to try to take advantage of the majority of the fiscal space that we will enjoy according to the projected evolution of the GDP. Okay, putting more load in the next years and planning adequately the timing for incorporating new projects into the fiscal burden, into the fiscal load. Okay.